Hey, Motorman here. I'm at Newport Richie Harley Davidson, and I'm about to take a 975 Nightster for a ride, and I'm going to compare it to the Kawasaki Z900. The first thing I notice while getting on this motorcycle is the low seat height as compared to the Z900. That's 34 inches. That's really high. It's more like a adventure bike as far as the height of the seat. This is nice and low, easily flat foot this. And you may say to yourself, Jerry, why are you comparing this bike to the Z900 RS? Well, here's why. Both of these bikes are supposed to harken back to the original. So an original Sportster, or one of them, I don't know, 20 years ago, there's a similar look between this bike and the original Sportster. It's similar, but the Kawasaki, which is a copy of their 1972 Z1000, looks a lot closer to the Kawasaki Z900. Now both of these bikes have similar size motors. This is a V-twin, both are water cooled. This is 975 cc's, Kawasaki is 948, and I believe horsepower is pretty close. Both of them around 100 horsepower to the rear wheel. And they're meant for the same purpose, which is sporty riding. In fact, Harley lists this bike on their website under sport. So I would call this either a sport cruiser or a sporting standard. And I would say the same thing for the Kawasaki. In fact, when the Kawasaki first came out, there weren't any out-and-out sports bikes with the fairings and all that. So until this day, I would still say that that's a sporting standard, equal on both sides to the standard and the Sportster. And a big difference I noticed immediately, as I said, was the low seat height. I'm having to lean forward a little bit more than on the Kawasaki. And the seat on this bike is quite a bit firmer than the Kawasaki. Kawasaki seat is pretty comfortable, but like I said, it's way up there, 34 inches off the ground. And I would say this one is about 25 or 26 inches, so that's a major difference. And it's a major difference in the feel of the motorcycle. I feel more like I'm sitting in this bike versus the Kawasaki, where it always feels like I'm sitting on top of it, if you understand my meaning there. Now, as far as performance, the gearing on both of these bikes is totally different. The Kawasaki being geared extremely low. You're hitting 6th gear at about 40 miles an hour. And since the gearing is so much shorter on the Kawasaki, it feels a lot faster than this bike, because it takes a bit. You got to wind this bike a bit to get it going. The Kawasaki is almost immediately winding out, especially in 1st gear. But I would say, you know, if you race both these bikes, it may be pretty close at the quarter mile. Close power-wise and weight-wise, very close. This bike rides a lot firmer than the Kawasaki. Kawasaki has a nice, I would say even plush ride, because there's so much travel to the suspension, because that seat height is way up in the air, more comparable to an adventure tourer type or adventure cruiser type motorcycle. Neither of them have any kind of carrying capacity. They're both naked bikes for sure. And really it depends on two things. If you're deciding between these two, you like the nostalgia look of both of these motorcycles, you try to decide between the two, it's going to come down to how the bike feels to you, maybe even seat height. If you're a very short person, the Kawasaki is not the bike for you. But also the biggest consideration is the price difference. Now I got to check the price on this bike. I believe it's somewhere in the $15,000 range. Kawasaki is about 12 grand MSRP, but then you got to add freight and all the other stuff they add to it. Surcharge. Yes, there is a surcharge on Japanese bikes as well, and whatever the dealer adds. And yes, the Japanese or metric dealers are throwing $1,000, $1,500 dealer fee depending on where you go on their bikes, just like most Harley Davidson dealers. So when you by the time you get out the door with the Kawasaki, if you buy a new one, you're looking at closer to $14,000. Totally different character on both of these motorcycles. If you rev this bike out, it really moves. They say you could rev it up to 9,000, but I think you're not getting any more power once you get past about 7,500. Now, as far as handling limits, this bike has a 32-degree lean angle before the pegs start to scrape the ground. I haven't found the lean limit on the Kawasaki as yet. I just had it about a week, but I'm guessing on that bike you would run out of traction before you run out of a lean angle. Now 32 degrees means that's when the peg feelers start hitting the ground, but of course they fold up and you can go further. Eventually you probably hit the exhaust pipe on the right side. Both of them fun bikes to ride. I would say that this bike, if you're coming from a cruiser or a touring motorcycle, you're going to feel much more at home on the Nightster than you would on the Kawasaki, mainly because of that seating position being up so high. Now I'm going to get on the Kawasaki and I'm going to take it down the exact same road and give you my thoughts on that. Alright, so I'm on the same road I was on with the Nightster, and you know, there's some bumps in the road. You might not see them on video, but they're here. It's not the smoothest of roads, and I can tell you this is a much plusher ride than you would get on the Nightster because of so much suspension travel. In fact, this bike is so high up, I could put a set of semi-knobbies and do any kind of off-roading that you would do on an adventure bike, you could do on this one because it's got so much ground clearance or lean angle clearance. This feels like it's quicker because the throttle response is immediate, but that's due to the shorter gearing on this. At 60 miles an hour, this bike is turning over about 4,000 RPMs, which is quite a bit, and probably 3,000 at 60 miles an hour on the Nightster. This bike will go around a given curve and probably rocket out of the curve quicker than the Nightster, even though power is very similar. But because of the gearing, and this bike is redlined at 10,000 RPMs. There was no red line on the Nightster, but we were told they will rev to 9,000, but after 7,000, 7,500, you're not making any more power. The benefit to that is if you're, you know, third gear and you're on a mountain road, you don't have to shift that much and you don't need that much more power. Again, I mentioned the vibration. Yes, this bike does have high frequency vibration. It's not bad. I mean, years ago in '76 I had a Honda 754 and I was like 20 years old at the time, so it wasn't due to my age, but my hands after an hour on that bike would get numb. On this, I'm getting a little tingle after about an hour riding, but they're not numb. Maybe out on the road at 70 or 80 because the bike is probably turning over 8,000 RPM at that speed in 6th gear. Yeah, I probably would get that tingling numb sensation. So I wouldn't use this bike for, you know, long rides like that. If you watch the video where the reason I got this bike is so I could use it at the track, and at the track that's where that tremendous lean angle really comes in handy. You can go a lot faster if you got a good lean angle without having to worry about the pegs or anything levering the tire off the ground. I can't imagine the exhaust hitting on this bike. I'm thinking 45 degrees or so, and any more than that on street tires, there's a good chance that you're going to run out of traction rather than lean angle. The Nightster, you'd run out of lean angle first. I do have a windshield I put on this bike, which puts the wind right about eye level. It gets it off your chest. Pretty good windshield for its intended purpose, blocking the wind. A little tedious to put on and to get adjusted properly. I've probably adjusted it 3 or 4 times now, and it needs more adjustment. But without the windshield, yeah, you're getting just like on the Nightster, a real blast of air. So anything above 60, and pretty soon you're going to get a little fatigued. Throttle response is overly sensitive. Very sensitive, even in this mode, which is supposed to give me less throttle response, but it takes some getting used to. I think this bike might be a little quicker. It could be just because of the gearing makes it feel that way, but it does seem to have or be more responsive right off of idle. And right now I'm cruising in 3rd gear. I give it throttle, and then it picks up immediately, whereas the Nightster, you got to wind it out more to feel the power. So which one would I choose if, you know, I'm just out to buy a bike that I could enjoy around town, short trips, and I wasn't even thinking about doing track days or anything? And if the price was the same, I would take the Harley. But price being what it is, a couple of grand less for this bike, yeah, I'd be much more tempted. Now, keep in mind too that Harleys hold their price up better than Japanese bikes for sure. So getting a good deal on a used one, that might make up for the initial price difference. And of course, styling comes into it. Depends on which one you like. As I said, this is more true to the original Kawasaki Z1 than the Nightster is to the original Sportster. So I could tell you is ride both of them and see which one you like. The problem is, at least around here, there are no metric dealers other than BMW that will let you ride their bikes. I like the riding position better on the Nightster because it's more of what I'm used to. Sitting in the bike rather than on top of it. And that is definitely the feeling you get on this bike, is you're sitting way up in the air on top of the motorcycle rather than being in it. Again, that's something you got to get used to. I'm getting used to it a little bit. Next, I'm going to take this bike through the course and tell you what I think there.
The taller cones are just an optical illusion then. The taller cones are just an optical illusion because it's the same.